So we're back for a second conversation. The subject is companionship, and the people, including Nick, who are part of this conversation are now going to introduce themselves, starting with Nick.
So my name is Niklas Rauch in Munich, and I'm really happy to be part of this wonderful conversation. I think this conversation gives the possibility to feel not lonely at all, even worldwide, as Munich and some of the areas we are coming from is a lot of distance, so to speak. And I'm just listening like a mouse. Sometimes I'm giving some little moment of idea. But anyhow, thank you for being part of this wonderful conversation.
Nicholas Rauch, the singing mouse, has just spoken. John, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm John Gatta, recently retired professor of English here at the University of the South, Sewanee, Tennessee, and formerly at the University of Connecticut.
Barbara, how about you?
My name is Barbara McGrath, and I am in my last semester of teaching a clinical program at UConn Law School that provides legal services to nonprofits. I live in Wyndham Center with my husband, who's the probate judge, and I have 2 grandchildren, as well as 3 children, but the grandchildren are the most important right now.
You're such a show-off. Faith.
My name is Faith Middleton, and I have been a reporter either on radio or television, or mostly radio, and in print for most of my career. And you know, that's it. So a lot of time in connection with people.
Hugh?
Hi, I'm Hugh Blumenfeld. I met Bruce Clements when we were both teaching English at Eastern Connecticut State University about 35 years ago. I taught for a little bit, and I then went off and was a traveling musician, singer-songwriter for about 10 years. And then at the age of 44, I asked the folks at UConn Medical School if they would take an old folk singer to be a doctor, and they said, bring it on, so I did. And so for the past 12 years, I've been a practicing family physician in Hartford, Connecticut. I still play some music, I still do some writing, and I'm still in love with Bruce, so.
And you look at the stars, right?
I look at the stars whenever the night is clear.
So the subject now is companionship, is not being alone. And what that means, what picture that brings to mind. Let's go back to pictures. What picture does the idea or the fact of companionship bring to your mind? John.
Well, my picture relates to a longtime friendship with a Swiss astrophysicist whose first wife died of brain cancer not long ago. And my image of companionship with, his name is Arnold Benz, is decision in the midst of his grief and unsettled state. We took a hiking tour through various of the Alps in both the Swiss German and the Italian sections, and that experience of connecting in a more profound way with someone I had known for many years and still know is a picture that is enduring for me. Maybe it's enough to say about that.
Yeah. Next, somebody jump in here. Tell me about companionship. Tell us about companionship.
I'm happy to jump in.
Good.
It's interesting. I appreciate John's picture, but somehow I sort of differentiate between companionship and friendship. I'm not sure that necessarily is fair, but I think of it, my picture is, I live in Wyndham Center, and it's a peculiarly social and therefore supportive environment. And the companionship that I feel when I go for a walk, even if I'm walking by myself and I pass various homes where I know people and someone comes out and says hello, or we chat for a while, or that sense of support almost, or connection, as the combination of both of them. I could take any of them on my walk with me, and it would be it would enhance the walk. And we find different ways to socialize together. And in the interrupted section, I'll talk about how we actually did that during COVID. But I do find that I haven't been able to figure out the way to define why the neighborhood is so connected, but I think it's that sense of companionship that could move from person to person, because we all are experiencing something similar, even though trust me, we have some very different people living in this community.
I was going to say that, yeah, companionship is a funny word. We often think of it as two people, or at least two people at a time, a dyad. But the image that came to my mind mostly was something that I look forward to coming out of Solitude for, and to be part of something bigger. I think of, every week I get to be part of a interdisciplinary team at the hospice organization that I work at. And the team is nurses and social workers and a bereavement coordinator and a volunteer coordinator and a pastor. And just, in the last moments of solitude before coming to the meeting, I prepare a song that I know I'm going to be singing at the end of the meeting, because it's become a tradition that I get to sing a song. And the song that I choose, it can be any song, but it changes its meaning from, it could be just a love song, it could be a lullaby, it could be just an old traditional song. And yet, when I imagine myself singing it in the hospice setting, it completely transforms its meaning. And the act of taking something in solitude and then bringing it to the team, my image is of us all sitting around the table involved in the same task, and not being able to do this task by ourselves, but needing every single person in the room to accomplish it. And when I imagine myself sitting and just looking around the room at all these people involved in the same thing, caring for people who are not even present, but who are present in our very, very much in our minds, and in a lot of people's hearts. It's just, I picture myself looking around the room and just feeling part of this bigger thing. And then I picture this gift that I have planned to give them at the end. And it's really a reclamation of my solitude, and which is my most natural state, and a way of being in the world that just feels like actually a gift for me, that I get to be part of this. But that's the image that I come up with.
How about you, Faith? What image do you come up with? Picture comes to mind with companionship?
Yeah, I think it's, I live near a traditional New England green, and it happens to be my dog, Bonbon's favorite place to go. And so I try often to give that to him. And so I drive 5 minutes to the green, and I walk him all around the green, and it's right downtown. And a lot of people take their dogs there. And so I realized that I was walking around like I was the mayor of the town, greeting people, graciously saying to them all, hello, how are you today? And let's have our dogs meet. And I thought, wow, you are so starved for companionship. And, I hope this doesn't appear too needy, but it's the most wonderful thing. It's the most wonderful part of my day. And so I'm not in a relationship with someone right now, a human being. And so I basically, I have always wished for that, a very successful relationship that would last as long as I do. And I don't feel that way anymore. I think, oh, I don't know if I want to share this apartment with someone. I think, the going out and going to dinner, and that's enough for me. And so that's something that I've learned about my own sense of companionship, and something all these things that are going on. That's what it's taught me.
It's hard for me to think of companionship without thinking of Hannah, whom you all know. And I don't want to talk about the break there, not at this moment, but that sense of being together in the same way. I think of the two of us watching the same movie and saying nothing to each other, or being in a gallery and looking at the same painting and saying nothing to each other. And that knowledge, that sense that in that silence, we are in some sense not the same, but God, so close. So what happens when companionship is interrupted? What happens when companionship is interrupted?
Well, I can report from my area that a lot of people started being starved for companionship in my neighborhood. And I ended up joining a weekly online book club and a weekly Saturday evening whiskey club cocktail hour, both of which, but there was a little bit of overlap between them, but not very much. And as much as I was spending all week on Zoom, it felt like, and it was driving me insane, that sense of everybody else needing to connect, even though we were only two-dimensional, was so strong that the limitations of that kind of gathering, so to speak, we ignored those limitations because it was so important for us to try to connect on a regular basis. Because literally people were afraid to even wave at each other from too close because we didn't know what that might mean. But it was interesting how the neighborhood identified different ways to make sure that we could maintain or reinvent some level of companionship, because it was so necessary. We couldn't live without it.
And there is that sense of common need. And there's something so basic to mortal human life about common need, about being in the same boat. I think just the fact of our isolation may have made us a little more sympathetic and a little more identified with each other.
Another more or less obvious interruption of companionship that occurs for many of us, for me, I know for you, Bruce, as well, is simply the phenomenon of moving our location in a significant way, which of course is something that Americans do quite often, but to leave behind one's whole community, one's whole nexus of relation, if not entirely, because there are letters and Zoom calls and all the rest, but it certainly, at the very least, requires a form of reinvention and rethinking. And all of our thoughts now are on the thousands of refugees from Ukraine and what it must mean for them to move to a place where they know no one and can carry only maybe a bag or a suitcase along the way. That's a kind of an interruption, to the ultimate, I suppose, in that sense. But I think of moving from Connecticut, which I'm reminded of all those of you mentioning it, it's still very much a part of me. But obviously, moving to Tennessee seemed to me a very alien prospect that I'm not sure I have entirely adjusted to even now.
Oh, but Sewanee is a special place.
It is.
Absolutely.
I had an interesting interruption of companionship, which I didn't even realize that at the time how different it was. But during the beginning of COVID, when I was working in the hospital on a regular basis, I ended up, and if you remember at that time, we didn't know how it was transmitted. We were washing our grocery bags, things like that. And so I moved out of our house. So my wife was taking care of her elderly parents who were in their late 90s. And I didn't know how I might be, contagious. So I moved out of my house for 2 months from the beginning of the pandemic. Like I think it was April and May. I moved out, and at that point, my kids were back home from school because school had closed. So everybody was home, and I realized it was the first time that I think I had ever lived alone. In college, I had roommates. When I lived in New York City for a while, I had roommates. Then I met my wife, and we were always been together. And so this was 2 months of living on my own, and it had its pluses and minuses. It was I got to practice my instruments a lot more without worrying about bothering people. I didn't take the companionship for granted that I tended to do. I scheduled visits every day to see the family and spend some time with them outside, of course. So we would meet on the back porch or the front porch. Of course, if you remember, it was actually a pretty cold, rainy spring up here in Connecticut, and I thought I would get to spend more time. But even so, it would be 50 and raining and windy, and we would gather outside for a little bit and talk, or take. I think I took more walks around the lake with Andrea than I usually do. But during the interruption, I actually got to treasure both the companionship and the solitude a little bit more, and it seems to connect. I'm not sure how it connect, but even in the hospital, I appreciated the loss of companionship of the patients that I was taking care of. Nobody was allowed to be in the hospital, and there was one patient. I ended up sitting in his room while he passed away, just so I could tell his family that he had not died alone. And it wasn't much, and it wasn't actually protracted, but it just felt like an important thing to be with him, so that there was some sense of companionship. And maybe it was just for me, but it was nice to be able to talk to his family later and give them that. So it was a terrible time, it was an awful time, and it was also kind of amazing, and in so many ways. I mean, you were living 125% every day, all the time, in companionship and in solitude, and the shift from one to the other.
How do we go forward? I mean, maybe I'm asking, what have you learned? What have I learned from a broken companionship? And I must confess that what I have learned is that I didn't pay enough attention. And that particularly with Hannah's past, I suddenly came to realize what a terrible, terrible time her growing up was. And I never really acknowledged that, even though I wrote a book about it. And I think I would have been more adequate if I had taken account of what she had suffered. And it makes me, of course, think, well, I don't want to do that again to anybody, including the person who delivers my mail.
So they're going to have to invent a Zoom where you can really reach in and hug somebody.
Yeah. Somehow adequate seems heroic when you talk about it like that.
I think adequate is a significant understatement, but I think I think that to some degree, what you were saying, Bruce, is that perhaps we took some things for granted, and that the last couple of years we've learned those things, as Hugh was saying, not to take them for granted. And that hopefully, I mean, I realized how hard it was to keep reaching out to people who I haven't seen because I wasn't allowed to see them, and how that I started sort of shrinking in, and I needed to do more, make more of an effort to continue to reach out instead of just waiting for people to call me. And I still haven't done a very good job of it, but I have decided to retire, and I would blame it completely on COVID at this point, because I think there are more important things like spending. One thing I have learned in my entire life is being there is important. And since we couldn't do that for the last couple of years in the meaningful way, other than Hugh, thank you for all the work that you did and for being there for those people whose families couldn't be there for them. I want to be there for my mother-in-law. Twice last week called at, once, but 2 mornings, not in a row, to say, she's 92. She said, I think I'm dying today. Can you come and hold my hand? And by the time I got to her house, which is an hour away, she was fine. She was all dressed. She was sitting there happy. She goes, I don't know what's going on. I thought, well, I don't know. And I love her dearly, and I would drive there, and that's not a problem. But I realized that it was important for me to go and be there. And that's one of the things that I think I've learned over the last interruption, that I need to make that effort and be there.
Even if the effort isn't returned, I mean, I think maybe
It's not a zero-sum game. This is not about that. It's about
not about counting. It is absolutely not about counting. And maybe we learn a little bit of, I don't know whether it's nerve or what, to say, you don't have to answer, I'm going to call again.
Was it you that said to me once, when we did an interview together, this was Bruce's idea.
Yeah.
Was it you who said to me, I was talking about accepting that something has happened to you, and you said, no, you don't have to accept ever. You don't ever have to think that or feel that. You just have to adjust. And I've repeated that about 100 times to people in difficult circumstances, and attributed it to you. So if it's not your philosophy, you're looking pretty good at this point.
At this point.
So I guess that's a way I've definitely changed. Because I think you said that whether it was a bee sting or something truly fatal in about 5 minutes, it was still all the same.
I'm trying to remember. I think one of the reasons you are a great interviewer, you're such a great listener. You probably pay more attention to what I'm saying than I did.
Well, anyway, I loved it. It helped me. I was volunteering for a while at a hospice, and it helped me to, sort of emotionally get through that experience.
What made you do it? What made you do that work?
Well, I knew someone who was dying, and I started going to see her. And then I just, kept coming back. And then I met the director, and the next thing I knew, I was you know, having conversations with people. And you know, there have been 2 times in my life when I couldn't take it anymore. And that was one of them. And the other one was doing interviews for the Holocaust Archive at Yale. And I did that for as long as I could take it. And then I couldn't take it anymore. And they said, you need to go home. So from those experiences, I think, you know, boy, there is a look at the people in Ukraine and all the surrounding countries, you know, they can take a lot. Is it that some people are born resilient, or is it something we choose and learn? I still don't know.
I mean, acceptance seems to assume that the thing that you're accepting and yourself stay the same, and somehow adjusting acknowledges that you can change the nature of the thing that you think just happened, and you can change yourself. And for me, the adjusting part, I mean, maintaining a sense of gratitude, even with all the, I think for me, that's the challenge. How can you adjust your frame so that whatever happened and however you changed, and however the thing that looked like a tragedy, that looked like it was just all bad, how can you rearrange it so you come out grateful and you come out transformed somehow? It's the adjusting is not capitulation, but a transformation somehow. And somebody was talking earlier about all these people who did amazing things in their solitude, in confinement, and how they transformed something that anybody would consider horrible to something that was, you know, fertile.
But it's hard to do that. I think the bravery or courage of people to be able to make the necessary adjustment and to see gratitude. I see, unfortunately, way too many people who don't seem to be able to do the adjustment that you're talking about, Hugh. And I think I don't know how you teach someone to do that. I've been lucky enough not to have to really address anything quite like that. And to Faith's point about how people in the Ukraine, whether they're born like that, that's always that interesting question. If I were tested, how would I respond? If I had been in Nazi Germany, what would I have done? I'd like to think that I'd be one of the good guys, but it was terrifying. And right now, even dealing with the Russians in the Ukraine, it's terrifying. How do you stand up and say, I want my husband and my son to go and fight? Because, I mean, I'd be terrified. And yet these people have been incredibly strong. And I don't want to be tested, because would mean obviously something horrible happening. But I think that's when we learn whether we can adjust or not.
You know, you're making me think about a woman who is, at the time of this recording, has just been through her interrogation to become a Supreme Court justice. And she is Black and would be the first person, a woman of color, to be on the court. And she's an extraordinary, she has an extraordinary intellect. And, you know, you are making me think of her ability to answer in the first hand the most ridiculous questions sometimes, but also her ability to maintain, to not get drawn in, you know, to not get angry at the things that are being said, that kind of resilience. And occasionally you would see a tear come down her cheek. But she was amazing. And she too makes me think, were you born that way? Do you know, during the boards where they're testing you, because this is what you're going to face, and they're throwing those questions at her as rehearsal? did it hurt her? You know, how could she do it? How do some people do that? I tried to pick the questions that I would, you know, when I hold up a book about racist babies, and they're showing this to a Black woman, and I think to myself, what would I say? What would I do? You know, like your question, what would I do in this challenging time?
I think, Faith, your reference to that calls to mind for me the circumstance that while Jackson did have extraordinary self-possession, perseverance, there were some people around her. One of the more heartening aspects of those proceedings, like Cory Booker perceived that she needed some ministering, and so I think his presence and his contribution was part of what enabled her to sustain as well as she had. It wasn't entirely up to her, and he made her feel that, and that for me was one of those beautiful moments in an otherwise distressing sequence.
Yes, yes, he made me cry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that perfect support that he lent her made me cry.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Yeah.
Brings it back to
Maybe
companionship. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I will break in. Showing up. Okay, Hugh, you talk now.
I was going to say it seems to bring it back to companionship and what we do for each other, and with each other, and really, Faith, the companionship that we feel with her is something that gives us strength. I think also, I'm proud to believe in her.
Yeah.
And you know, as much as she hopefully does not feel as alone, you know, I don't feel so alone knowing that she's up there as well.
Isn't it a curious thing that we project all kinds of things onto you know, movie stars, famous people, and you know, we choose to believe in them. We have no idea who they are for real, but you know, we love them, we despise some of them, but there is a whole thing that happens non-verbally about those people that is just extraordinary to me.
A couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times in the last 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I have thought, oh, that's the last word. I want to end this conversation on that word. So I have to do it sometime. So I'm going to do it now. Unless one of you has a last word. Actually, I have a last word, I realize. And that is, and maybe it does summarize a lot of what's been said, reach out, reach out, reach out. Okay, so we're going to take another 5 minutes, guys, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about time.